Looking back, I should have known that standing at the altar in my sister's place wasn't just a lie. It was a death sentence. To the world, I was the cursed twin with the forbidden black fur, a stain on our pack's honor. But as the Alpha King leaned in to claim his bride, his whisper sent a shiver of ice through my soul. I know you aren't her, and I've been waiting for a shadow like you to play with. Chapter 1. Looking back, I should have known that my father's desperate smile was a death sentence, but as I stood in that damp stone cellar, all I could smell was the rot of our pride. Mira crouched in the deepest shadows of the Iron Crag tunnels, her breath hitching as the jagged stone bit into her palms. Above her, the floorboards of the great hall groaned under the weight of 100 high-born shifters. She was the family's dirty secret, the shadow twin born with the forbidden black fur that the elders called a stain on the moon's grace. Because of that, she lived her life in the damp dark, a ghost in her own home. Truth be told, she didn't mind the silence, but the way her father looked at her today made her skin crawl. He descended the stairs with a torch that flickered against the weeping walls. "Mira," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. "She's gone. Lyra has fled." Mira stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her sister, the golden, perfect Lyra, was supposed to marry the Alpha King today to settle the blood debt of their pack. Without that marriage, the king's executioners would turn these tunnels into a tomb. "The king's entourage is at the gates," her father choked out, clutching Mira's shoulders. "If they don't see a bride, they will slaughter us all." Mira felt a cold weight settle in her gut because she knew what was coming next. What followed was a blur of rough hands and stinging nettles as they scrubbed the scent of the earth from her skin. They wrapped her in heavy, white silks that felt like a shroud. Beneath the moonlight, the Iron Crag gates groaned open. Mira stepped out, her face hidden behind layers of lace. Soon after, the sound of massive paws hit the dirt. King Cassius didn't arrive in a carriage. He arrived as a storm of silver fur and muscle. He shifted in a blur of motion, his human form tall and imposing. "The Iron Crag bride," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are quiet, Lyra." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her veiled cheek. Mira froze. Truth be told, she was a fraud standing on a precipice. That night, the royal chamber was a cavernous room carved into the peak. Cassius stood by the window, watching the moon. "You have the hands of a worker," he said, stepping into her personal space. He reached out and finally did what she feared most. He lifted the veil. He stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. "I knew you weren't her the moment I touched your hand at the altar," he whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But your eyes, they are darker, like the pits of the world where the stars don't reach. Tell me, Shadow Bride, where is your sister?" Mira's soul answered with a silent scream. He knew from the very first second. Yet a growl rose in his throat, not of anger, but of a dark, simmering hunger. "My sister is unwell," Mira stammered, the lie tasting like ash. "Spirit?" Cassius chuckled. "The girl I met during the treaty had the spirit of a songbird. You have the spirit of a forest at midnight." Next, his expression shifted into something predatory. The morning light brings the High Council. They will expect to see the Queen's shift. If you cannot run, you had better find a way to bleed. A little shadow. You move through the dark like you were born from it, Cassius murmured the next morning. Instead of the executioner, he led Mira deep into the hidden archives. If you are to survive the elders, you must understand what you truly are. Not only that, but he revealed she was the Void Wolf, a guardian that exists between the physical world and the shadow realm. Mira traced the etched lines of an ancient tablet, her thoughts spinning. Because of that, she felt a flicker of hope. As the silence stretched, he leaned down, his breath ghosted over her ear. I do not want a queen who cowers, Mira. I want the shadow who stands beside me. What followed was a week of secret training. It was during these hours that she began to correct his ancient maps, her sharp mind finally finding a match in his. The morning sun hit the peaks of the Iron Crag Mountains like a physical blow, but deep within the royal sanctuary, the light was a filtered, dusty gray. Cassius didn't take Mira to the training grounds where the elite warriors sparred with silver-tipped spears. Instead, he led her down a spiral staircase so old the steps were grooved like a riverbed. The council believes that the physical world is all that matters, Cassius said, his voice echoing off the damp walls. They value the silver-gray pelt because it is easy to see. It is predictable, but they have forgotten the legends of the void. Truth be told, Mira felt more like a prisoner than a queen as she followed him into the hidden archives. The room was a labyrinth of stone tablets and ancient hides, a smelling of dust and the weight of centuries. It was here, in the silence, that the mask of the Scholar King began to slip, revealing a man who was as restless as the shadows he studied. Cassius unrolled a massive hide, pinning it to a stone table with 2 heavy daggers. Look at the stars, Mira. The elders see the light of the suns, but a void wolf sees the space between them. You aren't meant to fight like a soldier. You are meant to be silent before the strike. What followed was a brutal lesson in metaphysics. Cassius pushed her to her limits, not with physical combat, but by demanding she command the very air around her. Close your eyes, he commanded, his voice a low vibration near her ear. Don't look at your pupils, look with your blood. Because of his proximity, Mira's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. Every time his hand brushed hers to correct her posture, a searing heat bloomed beneath her skin. She wasn't just a twin switch anymore. She was a student of a man who looked at her as if she were the most complex puzzle he had ever encountered. During their 3rd night in the archives, the tension shifted. Cassius was hunched over a strategic map of the northern borders, his brow furrowed in frustration. The rogue packs are moving through the Mist Valley, he grumbled, but the terrain is impassable for a silver-gray scout. The light reflects off the quartz in the stone. They are seen before they can even smell the enemy. Mira stepped closer, the scent of cedar and old parchment wrapping around her. She looked at the map, the very lands she had spent 20 years navigating from the tunnels. You're looking at the peaks, she whispered, her finger tracing a jagged line near the valley floor. But the shadows don't stay at the top. There is a tunnel system here, near the Weeping Falls. It's narrow and the air is thick with sulfur, but a shadow could move through it unseen. Cassius froze, his silver eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying intelligence. In that moment, he didn't see the ugly twin or the cursed girl. He saw a brilliant tactical mind. "You've been there," he realized. "I lived there," Mira replied, her voice steadying. "While Lyra was learning to dance, I was learning how to survive the damp." The silence that followed was heavy with a new kind of energy. Cassius reached out, his thumb tracing the pulse point at her wrist. "They told me the Ironcrag daughters were as delicate as glass," he murmured, stepping into her personal space until the air thickened between them. "But you are the steel that holds the glass together." Next, he did something that made her world tilt. He didn't pull away. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Do you know why I haven't turned you over to the council, Mira? It's not just because I need a bride to settle the debt. It's because for the first time in my life, I am not the only person in the room who can see the truth." The chemistry was a burning, intense fire. Mira felt the bond pulse, a heavy golden chain that was no longer a burden, but a lifeline. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers tangling in the furs of his cloak. "And what is the truth, Cassius?" "The truth," he growled, his lips inches from hers, "is that I would burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let them touch a single hair on your head." But the romance was a minefield. The High Council was becoming restless. They demanded a public mating run to prove the lineage was pure. Cassius knew that if Mira shifted under the full moon without a cloak of shadow, the game was over. What followed was a desperate race against time. Cassius taught her the veil of the void, a technique where a shifter pulls their own shadow into their fur to dampen their scent and color. "It will feel like ice," he warned. "It will feel like you are disappearing from the world." Every time Mira tried, she failed, her black fur shimmering defiantly under the torchlight. Because of her frustration, she lashed out, her wolf snarling at the back of her throat. "I am a stain, Cassius! You cannot hide the night with a few words and a scroll!" Rather than being angry, Cassius simply caught her by the waist, pulling her into the hard heat of his chest. "You are not a stain," he hissed, his eyes flashing with alpha dominance. "You are the protector. Now breathe! Breathe with me!" As they synchronized their breathing, the miracle happened. The shadows in the corners of the room began to stretch toward Mira, wrapping around her ankles like velvet ribbons. Deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't just learning to hide. She was learning to lead. On the final night before the primal howl, the archives were silent. Mira sat on the edge of the stone table, her white silks a stark contrast to the obsidian darkness of the room. Cassius stood before her, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that broke her heart. "Tonight, they will try to break us," he whispered. "They will use the moon to force your hand. But remember what we found in these maps, Mira. The shadow doesn't just hide, it survives." "And if I fail?" she asked, her voice a fragile thing. "Then we go to the void together," he replied, his lips finally meeting hers in a kiss that wasn't a question, but a vow. It was the first time she felt truly seen, not as a ghost, not as a twin, but as a queen. As the first note of the ritual horn echoed through the mountain, Mira realized that the plan was no longer about saving her family. It was about saving the man who had looked into the darkness and seen a star. The primal howl vibrated through the stone floor, a sound so ancient it pulled the marrow from Mira's bones. "The moon demands the shift!" the elders barked. Mira stood on the edge of the ritual circle, her heart hammering. Without warning, a shadow moved within the crags, a rogue assassin aiming for Cassius's throat. In a single heartbeat, the air shattered as Mira exploded into the void. She moved between the beats of time, invisible to everyone but the king. Between one breath and the next, a massive, pitch-black wolf materialized, swallowing the moonlight. She hit the assassin mid-flight, her jaws snapping shut with a thunderclap. As the silence roared, Mira stood over the fallen rogue, her golden eyes glowing. The impossible had happened. The stain had saved the king. The air thickened with betrayal as the iron gates creaked open. Lyra had returned. "My lord, I was taken!" she wailed. Mira watched her sister point a trembling finger toward the balcony. "She is a monster hiding in my skin!" In that moment, Cassius's hand tightened on Mira's. "She is playing for the crown, Mira, not for the man." Yet the council was already moving. Cassius stood from his throne. "Tonight, at the peak of the eclipse, the sisters will shift. One is a queen by birth, the other is a queen by bone." That night, Cassius pulled Mira into a kiss that was a desperate, burning, intense fire. "I want the night that guards my sleep," he growled. "I want the shadow who stands where my enemies fear to tread." The eclipse cast a sickly violet light. Mira stood upon the ritual platform, but something inside her shifted. A sudden pain lanced through her skull as the elders began the howl, laced with wolfsbane. What followed was a spectacle of horror as Lyra shifted with ease, while Mira collapsed, her spirit fractured by the poison. Moments later, the world tilted as the guards dragged Mira toward the stone pits. As the silence roared, the council declared the marriage void. Mira was tossed into the damp, dark pit, the very place she had spent her life trying to escape. But then, a microscopic spark of the bond flickered. Cassius was fighting, and if he was fighting, she couldn't afford to die. The transition from the high ledge to the stone pits felt like falling through the ice of a frozen lake. One moment, Mira had been a queen. The next, she was a prisoner of the very pack she had bled to protect. The elders had been meticulous. They didn't just throw her in a cell. They threw her into the cradle of silence, a pit carved so deep into the mountain's root that the light of the moon was a distant, mocking memory. The air in the pit was thick with the cloying, metallic scent of burning wolfsbane. It wasn't just a poison. It was a sensory cage. Every time Mira tried to reach for her wolf, the herb flared in her veins like liquid fire, making her bones feel as if they were being ground into glass. "Truth be told," she whispered to the damp walls, her voice raspy from the fumes, "the darkness is different when you're a prisoner of it." Because of the poison, her connection to Cassius felt like a frayed rope in a storm, slipping, snapping, and leaving her more alone than she had ever been in this iron crag tunnels. Above her, she could hear the muffled thrum of the pack celebrating. Lyra was there, likely draped in the royal furs that belonged to Mira, playing the part of the redeemed bride with sickening perfection. Every laugh that drifted down the iron grate was a reminder of Mira's failure. She had been too arrogant to think a king's love could rewrite 1,000 years of prejudice. On the second night, the iron grate groaned open. A silhouette blocked out the dim torchlight from above. It was Lyra. She didn't look like a woman who had been ambushed. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "You always were the difficult one, Mira?" Lyra sneered, her voice echoing off the mossy stone. "Father should have drowned you at birth. It would have saved us all the trouble of this masquerade." Mira looked up, her golden eyes dull but defiant. "You don't want him, Lyra. You want the crown. But Cassius, he knows. He will never touch you without seeing me." Lyra's face contorted into a mask of spite. "He will touch me because the council demands an heir, and you are a ghost in a hole. What's worse, the executioner is sharpening his silver for dawn. I've already picked out the gown I'll wear to watch your head fall." What followed was a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight on Mira's chest. Lyra slammed the grate shut, leaving Mira in a darkness so absolute it felt like she had already died. But the elders weren't done. They sent the head elder to the edge of the pit, his voice a rhythmic drone as he recited the sins of the shadow. He told her that Cassius had already signed her death warrant to save his own throne. He told her that her mother had been exiled to the northern wastes for birthing a demon. As the silence roared, Mira felt the first cracks in her resolve. It was easy to be brave when Cassius was holding her hand. It was impossible to be brave when the world was telling her she was nothing more than a mistake. In fact, she began to wonder if the void was just another name for the emptiness she felt in her soul. Then, at the hour of the deepest cold, something happened. A single rhythmic thrumming began in the stone beneath Mira's fingertips. It wasn't the mountain shifting. It was a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. It was the bond. Cassius wasn't silent. He was being suppressed. She realized then that the elders hadn't just imprisoned her. They had bound their king. The Scholar King was being forced into a cage of his own, and the only person who could navigate the shadows to reach him was the stain they had thrown away. "You aren't a curse!" Cassius's voice from the archives echoed in her mind. "You are the only thing in this kingdom that is real." The realization acted as an antidote to the wolfsbane. Mira didn't try to fight the silver chains with her strength. She tried to fight them with her acceptance. She stopped trying to be the golden bride Lyra was. She stopped trying to be the pure queen the council wanted. She embraced the black fur. She embraced the rot. She embraced the void. What followed was a sensation of weightlessness, as Mira stopped seeing the pit as a cage and started seeing it as a part of her own body. The molecules of her being began to vibrate at the frequency of the shadows. The silver shackles, designed to hold flesh and bone, began to smoke as they passed through her phased wrists. Deep down, she knew the truth. The council had made a fatal mistake. They had thrown the Shadow Queen into the one place where she was most powerful. As the first hint of the executioner's dawn touched the top of the grate, Mira stood up. She wasn't just a wolf anymore. She was a weapon of pure obsidian energy. She looked at the iron bars above and whispered, "Looking back, the plan was simple, but I think it's time I showed them what a stain can do to a white silk throne." The The silver chains hissed against her flesh. Mira stopped fighting the silver. Instead, she let the darkness of the pit flow into her. What followed was a sensation of weightlessness as her body began to phase. Because of that, the silver shackles fell through her wrists like mist. Without warning, Mira stood, her eyes swirling with obsidian depth. Moments later, Mira moved through the stone walls like summer fog. She reached the great hall, seeing Cassius bound to his own throne, while Lyra stood over him with a poisoned goblet. Mira reached out with her mind, projecting her void scent into the lower tunnels to call the lowborn misfits. As if fate demanded it, the shadows began to twist. Mira stepped out, her aura that of a sovereign. The ascent from the pits was not a climb. It was a haunting. Mira moved through the mountain's veins like ink through water. Her body a shimmering haze of obsidian particles. Every time a guard's torchlight swept through a corridor, she didn't hide. She simply ceased to be in their dimension. Truth be told, the wolfsbane still lingered in her system, but it had morphed from a poison into a cold, driving fuel. As she reached the royal antechamber, the scent of copper and ozone hit her with the force of a physical blow. The great hall was a sea of gray-furred warriors, their hackles raised in a communal fever of bloodlust. At the center, Cassius was bound to the ancient throne, the stone chair of his ancestors now serving as his pillory. The space between them burned. Even as a phantom, Mira could feel the agony of his restraint. His eyes, usually silver and calculating, were bloodshot and wild, locked onto the ceremonial goblet Lyra held to his lips. Not only that, but the head elder stood over him, a silver quill in hand, demanding the king sign the decree of Mira's execution to purify the pack. "Sign it, my king," Lyra cooed, her golden fur rippling under her gown. "Sign it and let us begin our true reign. The demon is dead in her hole." Mira didn't strike yet. Instead, she reached into the collective consciousness of the mountain. She sent her void call down to the cellars, the kitchens, and the outer edges of the territory. She called on the half-bloods and the shadow-marked, the ones who had been told their entire lives that they were less than whole. As if fate demanded it, the shadows in the great hall began to stretch toward the center of the room. The torches flickered, their golden flames turning a sickly, spectral blue. A low, subterranean vibration shook the floorboards, a sound like 1,000 wolves growling in unison beneath the earth. What followed was a spectacle of terror. The doors to the hall didn't burst open. They simply vanished into smoke as a tide of shadow-furred wolves flooded the chamber. These weren't the pure elite. These were the forgotten, and they were led by a queen they had never seen but always felt. Mira manifested in the center of the hall, appearing between the beats of the head elder's heart. She didn't shift into a beast of burden. She became the Void Wolf. She was a towering, iridescent nightmare of midnight fur, her eyes 2 burning suns of gold. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The transformation was a silent explosion of darkness. Mira lunged. She didn't go for the guards. She went for the iron. With a roar that shattered the stained glass windows, she tore through the iron restraints holding Cassius. The metal didn't just break. It disintegrated into ash under the touch of her void fire. Cassius stood, his alpha roar joining hers in a harmony of steel and shadow. The scholar king was gone. In his place was a warrior who had finally found his weapon. Together, they turned on the council. Mira didn't kill them. She stripped them. With a flick of her tail, she sent a wave of void energy through the hall that temporarily neutralized the shift of every high-born wolf in the room. They were left human, naked, and powerless before the stain they had tried to erase. Lyra lunged, her desperation turning into a frantic, clumsy attack. "This is my crown!" she screamed. Mira didn't move. She simply let her sister's claws pass through her phased shoulder. Then, reaching out with a paw of pure energy, Mira pinned Lyra to the stone. "Rather than being the sun," Mira growled, her voice vibrating in the souls of everyone present, "you were just a reflection. And the sun has set on your lies." As the morning light finally breached the horizon, hitting the hall through the shattered glass, the miracle occurred. The light didn't hurt Mira. Instead, it caught the iridescent sheen of her black fur, revealing hidden patterns of silver and gold, the true marks of the protector. In that moment, the central question was answered. The void wasn't the absence of light. It was the keeper of it. The tension broke as the pack fell to their knees. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Cassius stepped forward, his hand resting on Mira's neck as she shifted back to her human form. He draped his own royal cloak over her shoulders, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I knew," he whispered, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "I knew the moment I touched a shadow that I would never be able to live in the sun again." What followed was the systematic removal of the elders and the liberation of the Iron Crag tunnels. Mira didn't just take the crown, she broke it, creating a new council that included the very wolves who had followed her from the dark. As the sun climbed higher, painting the peaks in shades of violet, Mira stood on the high ledge. She felt it etched in fire, the absolute certainty that she was no longer a ghost. She was the Alpha King's queen, the mother of the void, and the dawn of a new world.